Hey. Time for another Out of This World story from rSpace. Some people say life imitates art, but this cheater couldn't create a masterpiece to save her life. Her best work was wrecking what she had. Today on rSpace, a gallery of bad decisions. Wife had affair partner threaten me during the divorce. I went to the police with evidence and took everything. I'm a longtime lurker in this sub. I'm not afraid to admit that I've spent a lot of time scrolling through the posts in here, laughing to myself that it could never be me. My wife loves me, and I'd be able to catch the signs of an affair right away. And in the end, it turned out that I overestimated her. She was ready to throw everything away over nothing. My wife, Isabel, and I, 28 female and 29 male, have been married for 3 years, and it was a mostly happy marriage. The closest thing to a major conflict we had was when she had to get a job. She studied marketing, but she's always been an artist at heart. Unfortunately, her art career didn't really go anywhere. So in order to make ends meet and pay off her student loans, she had to get a job doing something else. I'm still not sure why she studied marketing since she seems to hate it so much, but a marketing job was the only choice she really had. The money was good and it helped keep the household afloat, but she was miserable at first, and she made sure I knew it. We fought a lot around that time. She seemed to blame me for convincing her to get a job. Eventually, I had to sit her down to talk to her about taking responsibility for her decisions. She chose to study marketing, and now she had student loans to pay off. Her art career might make her feel fulfilled, but it wasn't putting any money in her pocket. She was a grown woman who had to make the responsible choice instead of following her hopes and dreams. She could always keep making her art as a hobby. She wasn't happy with that answer, but she saw the sense in it. She stopped taking out her frustration on me, but she didn't talk to me for a few days. Eventually, she got over it, and things went back to normal. She wasn't happy with her job, but who is, really? But once she started setting aside a few hours a week for her art, her mood improved a lot. Her art is where the whole mess starts. She was filling up a spare room with all of her pieces, which I didn't mind. It's not like we were doing anything with the space anyway, and honestly, I really like her art. I always have. That's why it was a hard decision for me when I initially brought up the idea of her getting a job. I often went into the spare room to check out her art and see what she'd been making recently. I have a really good memory too, so I knew every single piece of art she had in the house. Eventually, she started bringing her art career back to life. She said she found a Facebook group where a bunch of artists get together to rent a public space and display their art for sale in sort of a communal gallery exhibition on 2 weekends every month. The first time she went, she didn't have any high hopes. I followed along as moral support and to help her set up. It wasn't a huge success, but she managed to sell 2 pieces. She was on top of the world. It made me glad to see her that happy, so I didn't have a problem with it when she wanted to go for the next one. She managed to sell a few more pieces, and it quickly became a regular thing. One day, she told me that the exhibitions were such a success that the organizers decided to start holding them every weekend. I hadn't been to all of them, but I'd been to a couple, and I'd noticed more artists and more customers each time. So I didn't question it. It was a nice side income for her, and it was helping her fulfill her artistic side. So more exhibitions just felt like a win to me. It didn't take much time before her story fell apart. About a month later, she came home from an exhibition and didn't volunteer any information about what she'd sold. That was unlike her. She always gushed about which pieces she'd sold as soon as she walked in the door. I could have assumed that she'd failed to make a sale, but she would have told me about that too. She always did. It was odd that she said nothing, but I wasn't suspicious or anything. I just asked how her day had gone and if she'd made any sales. Her reaction is what made me take a closer look. She seemed surprised and acted like she didn't hear what I said. I repeated myself and she stammered for a while before saying she couldn't remember what she'd sold. I didn't say anything, but that was a huge red flag to me. Each piece meant a lot to her, and I knew she'd never forget which piece she'd sold that day. I didn't accuse her of anything. I just kept making conversation. I prodded and tried to get her to remember which one it was. When she came up with a name, I immediately knew she was lying. She sold that painting a few weeks before. Like I said, I knew all her pieces really well, and that one had been a favorite of mine. I didn't call her out on her lie. I didn't want to start throwing accusations around without knowing what I was accusing her of. I just nodded and congratulated her on the sale, but I was already trying to figure out why she was lying to me. The obvious answer was that she was cheating on me. I didn't want to believe it. I thought we had a great relationship, but I had friends who'd gotten cheated on despite perfect relationships. It could happen to anyone. I just never thought it could be me. I was mad and heartbroken at the thought, and another part of me felt guilty for even considering the possibility. I knew I couldn't live like this, not knowing for sure whether she was having an affair, so I decided I would make a move to find out as soon as possible. That ended up being the very same night, when her phone was charging and she was in the kitchen getting dinner ready. I unplugged her phone and tried to unlock it, which is when I got my next sign that something was wrong. She'd changed her passcode. She'd been using the same one since before we got married, and now she'd changed it all of a sudden. She was definitely hiding something from me. Fortunately, she just changed her passcode to her birthday. For someone who was trying to keep me out of her phone, she hadn't done a good job picking a new code. Once I was in her phone, it didn't take long before I confirmed my worst fears. She hadn't been going to her exhibitions as often as she claimed. In fact, they still only held them twice a month. She'd made up the other 2 times so she could sneak away to meet up with James, the man she was cheating on me with. Their texts went into detail about everything. They met up almost exclusively at seedy motels, never anywhere remotely respectable. Based on that, along with the guy's borderline illiterate style of writing, it seemed like she wasn't exactly trying to trade up when it came to this guy. I didn't have the time to sit there and go through her messages in detail. I just recognized that I would be at a disadvantage if I got caught and we got into a fight before I had a chance to get the facts straight. Besides, reading through his messages was a chore. They were full of typos and lazy abbreviations that I hadn't seen since the 2010s, so I just exported the entire thread and emailed it to myself. Then I put her phone back the way I found it, and she was none the wiser. I didn't say anything about it to her at first, but I couldn't hide my disappointment in her either. I didn't talk much that night, and I didn't touch her at all. She could tell that something was wrong because before she went to sleep, she asked if I was all right. I told her that I was fine and I was just nursing a headache from this stressful day. That wasn't a complete lie. My head had been killing me ever since I found out about her affair. While she was asleep, I sat in the living room going through her messages with James. They'd met at one of the exhibitions. It didn't seem like he was one of the artists, but he didn't seem like an appreciator of art either. After getting her number, he'd sent a few messages flirting with her, and Isabel quickly caved. They met up at a motel, and things took off from there. What was even more embarrassing was that this guy seemed to be broke, and he was always asking Isabel for cash. At first he asked to borrow money, but he never paid it back. Eventually he dropped the pretense and would just tell her that he needed money. Isabel would always send it right away, no questions asked. I was shocked. It wasn't much, just $10 here and $20 there. It's not like she was putting our family in the hole to support this guy, but that didn't make it any less pathetic. My wife had a stable income with a husband who was well-read and a high earner, and here she was chasing some leech who could barely express himself in writing. I wanted to scream at her for throwing our relationship away for no reason, over someone who wasn't worth it, but I didn't have the strength that night. I felt drained from my discovery and decided to give myself some time to think about it. I told myself that I'd confront her the next day, but that didn't happen either. I ended up taking a week to think and get ready. It happened during her next exhibition. There actually was one happening that day, but I wasn't sure if she was even actually there. I didn't care either way. She could do whatever she wanted at this point, because as far as I was concerned, she wasn't my wife anymore. When I was home alone, I packed all my things and left the house. I didn't say anything to her about it. I just left a note. It said that I'd known about the affair and that she'd been lying to me. I explained that I was leaving her and filing for divorce. That was it. Simple, I know, but I didn't have much I wanted to say to her. She called me that same evening when she got back from work. She was crying hard. First, she asked where I was. When I refused to tell her, she said, "Babe, come home, let's talk." I told her that we could talk on the phone. She cried wordlessly for a while, and I honestly debated hanging up on her. I can't stand it when people try to make you feel bad for their own mistakes. I bet she wasn't crying whenever she snuck off to hook up with James. She pulled herself together and asked me what I thought I knew. I told her I knew all about James. I'd seen the messages on her phone, and I even had copies, so she shouldn't try to tell me it was all a misunderstanding. She said she was sorry, and it was all a stupid mistake. She'd met him at an exhibition, and she just liked the fact that she didn't have to think about work or responsibilities when she was with him. She said he made her feel like a teenager again. It was what she needed. I laughed and said it was because he was a bum who didn't have any responsibilities of his own. She didn't respond to my digs at her affair partner. She just kept repeating that she'd made a stupid mistake and she'd do anything to make it up to me if I gave her a chance. I told her it was a done deal. I wasn't coming back. She tried to find out where I was again, but I just dropped the phone. I still haven't told her I'm staying with a friend, though she's been trying her hardest to find out. Maybe she thinks she'll be able to persuade me if I see her in person. That's not possible. The week I spent living with her before I moved out was one of the worst weeks of my life. I actually hated her every time I looked at her. She has no chance of coming back into my life, and I'm satisfied with that. It's brutal when you put your all into supporting your wife, cheering her on, making sacrifices so she can chase her passion, and she turns around and uses that trust as cover to cheat. You gave her stability and support, and she threw it away for someone who couldn't even offer half of that. Walking away was the best move you could have made. Update. I really appreciate the show of support I got from this sub on my last post. It was reassuring to get so much helpful advice from people who had been through the same thing. It was also pretty interesting seeing all the wild lies and stories that some cheating partners came up with to cover up their tracks. Isabel knew I'd seen through her lies, and so she didn't bother trying to gaslight me. She just made excuses when she texted. And she texted a lot. She called as well, but I ignored those until I was told that she'd been served the divorce papers. She wasn't crying this time, but she didn't sound happy either. She confirmed that she'd been served and said she really wanted to talk to me. When I insisted that I wasn't going to meet up with her anymore, she flipped everything on me. She told me that she'd run to James because I hadn't been supportive of her art career, which wasn't true. She said I'd forced her to get a job, and James supported her following her passion. That was why she'd fallen for him. Even worse, she claimed I was the one responsible for our relationship falling apart because I wasn't giving us a chance at a discussion. According to her, she was the only one trying to fix our relationship. Never mind the fact that she was the reason it was falling apart in the first place. I ended the call once I was certain she didn't have anything useful to say. I wasn't going to sit there and listen to her make excuses all day. I didn't talk to her much after that. I ignored her calls and didn't see her at all outside of court. Until she ambushed me in front of where I was living one day. I'd been staying with a friend, Chris, at the time while I was working on getting my own place. She'd called him a few times to find out if I was staying with him, but Chris always covered for me. I don't know if someone told her that I was crashing with him or if she just suspected it, but somehow she figured out that I was with him. By that time, we were well into the divorce, and things were getting ugly. I'd brought up her lies and infidelity, and we were bitterly arguing over every little thing. What she really wanted to hold on to was the house, though, and I wasn't ready to give it to her. She wanted to live there, and I wanted to sell it and split the money. At first, I was curious about her insistence on keeping the house. It didn't make much sense to me. We'd gotten it expecting to have 2 kids. It was way too big for her, and she'd never be able to afford the payments on her own. And then I realized she probably wasn't planning to live there alone. She wanted James to move in with her. I wondered if she really expected him to help her pay for it. Based on their texts, he couldn't go a week without needing cash from her. I'm certain he didn't have a job. And that's what led to her little ambush. It was early in the morning when I headed out for work. She was sitting in a car parked just in front of the driveway. I didn't notice that anyone was inside until I was nearly in front of it. She popped out and said we really needed to talk. I was taken completely by surprise and asked her what she was doing there. She said we needed to come to a decision about the house, and it would be better for me if we did it without involving lawyers. At first that sounded like a threat to me, until she continued and said that the court was more likely to side with her because she was a woman. According to her, it would be easier for me if I just gave her the house and focused my energy on fighting for something else. I told her that wasn't how property division worked. She wouldn't just get the house because she's a woman. That was when I noticed she wasn't alone. James was in the driver's seat, looking out at me. When we locked eyes, he nodded at me and got out of the car. I stayed where I was while he got closer. I asked if I could help him with something, and he chuckled. He said I needed to let Isabel have the house, or I wouldn't like how things turned out. That was definitely a threat. I wasn't scared, but I didn't want to provoke him either. I couldn't tell if he had a weapon, and he looked like the type of guy who would carry one. He also looked like the type who would use it without hesitation. But I wasn't going to let him walk all over me either. This was the guy who was partly responsible for breaking up my marriage. I kind of wanted an excuse to get to kick his butt. I stared him down and asked if he was threatening me. He told me to take it however I wanted. I warned the 2 of them that I'd call the police if they didn't get off the property. James stepped forward and grabbed my shirt, saying that it seemed like I wanted to learn the hard way. I was getting ready to defend myself, but before things could escalate, Chris came out from inside the house. He yelled that he'd called the police already and told James to get off his property. That seemed to spook him. Maybe he didn't think anyone else was around and hoped he could bully me while I was on my own. James and Isabel hurried back into the car and drove off. Chris asked if I was okay and suggested taking the day off, but I told him I was fine. I couldn't let that scare me off of work. The only thing I needed from him was the footage from his doorbell camera. I wanted to have something to show the police when they came around. We went over the footage together. I was glad to see the video was clear enough to make out his face. The audio had also picked up all of our voices perfectly, and all of his threats were recorded. When the police arrived, I gave my statement and we provided them with a copy of the video. I couldn't give them James's last name, but I had his phone number from the chat logs I'd copied from Isabel's phone. A week later, I got a call from the police. They told me they'd tracked him down from the phone number I gave them. They'd run it through their system and found his name linked to a number of prior complaints. He had intimidation and harassment charges, as well as a few assault charges that had been dropped. Apparently, this wasn't the first time he'd threatened someone to get his way. The cops explained that they were investigating both James and Isabel. James for criminal threats and assault, and Isabel for criminal conspiracy because she'd recruited James to try to extort me. A few days later, I found out they had both been taken and questioned by the police. Isabel had tried to play innocent, claiming she didn't know James was going to get physical, while James threw her under the bus and said she'd asked him to intimidate me. I found it funny how they both turned on each other the moment they got into trouble. The police asked if I was willing to testify against them, and I didn't hesitate to say yes. Like I said, I'm not the type that can be bullied, and I was glad to be able to help give both Isabel and James what they deserved. The intimidation situation worked out for me in the end. It turned out to be a boost for me in the divorce, because the judge immediately took my side after hearing the lengths that she'd gone to get the house from me. He bluntly said he couldn't reward her underhanded tactics and ruled that we should sell the house, with a larger portion of the profits going to me. I also got most of the other things I wanted in the divorce, and she was left with nearly nothing. She hasn't been handling life after the divorce well at all. She's been telling anyone that will listen that I stole everything from her in the divorce. At first, it was difficult trying to convince everyone that I wasn't the bad guy in the situation. But once I told them about the intimidation case and how she was arrested, people quickly came around to my side. Her family, in particular, was disgusted to find out the real reason for the divorce, as well as the type of man she was going out with now. But family wasn't her only problem. Between legal fees for the divorce lawyer and legal fees for her criminal case, she's nearly flat broke. I found out that she lost her job because of the arrest. To the best of my knowledge, she hasn't found another one. The job market is tough enough already, even when you don't have an active court case hanging over your head. Isabel still claims that I ruined her life, like I was the one who convinced her to cheat or got her to try and threaten me out of the house. She's so used to dodging responsibility and not taking accountability for her own actions that she can't comprehend how her current situation is her fault. I tried to teach her some responsibility when I told her to get a job, but she used that as an excuse to step out on our marriage. Some people just can't be helped. It's honestly wild how someone can take every ounce of support you give them, twist it into some imagined slight, and then use that as an excuse to blow up their own life. You backed her, you gave her room to grow, and when she made bad choices, she doubled down instead of owning them. Then, to top it all off, she thought intimidation would somehow get her what she wanted. If anything, this whole mess just showed her true character. Self-centered, irresponsible, and willing to burn bridges if it means avoiding accountability. You didn't ruin her life, you just stopped shielding her from the consequences of her own actions. What's the wildest real-life masterpiece of betrayal you've ever witnessed? Share your stories with us below. And thank you for joining us today on rSpace. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video. See you next time.